So here's a question. How does the false construct of race, and yes, it is a false construct, or the real constructs of culture and cultural identity factor into our opposition to or support for a political candidate? Let's find out.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.
Welcome to the Connecting the Dots podcast with Dr. Wilmer Leon, and I am Wilmer Leon. Here's the point. We have a tendency to view current events as though they occur in a vacuum, failing to understand the broader historical context in which most events take place. During each episode of Connecting the Dots, my guests and I have probing, provocative, and in-depth discussions about the broader historic context in which most events occur. This enables you to better understand and analyze the events and the impact that these events have on the global village in which we live. On today's episode, the issue before us is, as I stated, how does the false construct of race, and it is a false construct, and or the real issues of culture and cultural identity factor into our opposition to and support for candidates? For insight, let's turn to my guest. Dr. Chantella Sherman is a historian and journalist whose work documents, deconstructs, and interprets eugenic themes in popular culture, identity formation among African Americans, and reproductive apartheid in carceral spaces and within marginalized communities. Publisher of Acumen Magazine, author of In Search of Purity, Eugenics and Racial Uplift Among New Negroes, 1915 and 1935, as well as Popular Eugenics in Television and Film. Also, she's a novelist of Fester and Spill. Dr. Chantella Sherman, welcome back.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
And as always, thank you for joining me. And I got to add, she's a very, very dear friend as well. So I get to call her Chantella. Before we get to the question posed in the open, a viewer of our last discussion reached out to me and wanted us to elaborate on the issues of eugenics in medicine, because many of us know some things about the Tuskegee study as well as Ms. Henrietta Lacks. But there's an awful lot more to eugenics and medicine than just those two issues. So starting there, particularly with the Tuskegee experiment, clarify what you know to be some of the misunderstandings about that, a little bit about Henrietta Lacks, and then where are we with eugenics and medicine?
Sure. It's a loaded question because it actually has the response is almost a series of volumes, quite frankly. But to synthesize this, understanding eugenics means what you're trying to do is create better people. And in order to create better people, you have to know what they're made of, what makes good stock, what makes good genes. And so what we've tried to do in this country through eugenicists is to create better people by restricting who can and who cannot have children, incarcerating people, performing sterilizations, forced sterilizations on folks who we deem as unfit. And so it's not just about the body, but it's the body politic. So if I determine that you're poor, for instance, it's believed that poverty is in your DNA. Diseases are automatically in your DNA. And so Black people as a whole were considered to be contaminated. We are still considered to be largely contaminated. We're a bad gene pool. We're a subhuman group according to science and eugenics. So based on this, studying any type of disease means studying Black people. And sometimes it means injecting them with certain things. So with Tuskegee, there's been a bit of a revisionist history about these are Black people who had syphilis, and we simply did not treat them in order to see the development of the disease or the course of the disease over years. The truth of the matter is many of these men were injected with syphilis, and that's the original documentation that we don't necessarily look at. We have to get to a point where we're looking at the entire scope of information and data. Alabama, Tuskegee was not the only place where these syphilis studies were taking place. The serological studies were taking place in 6 different states, and they were all connected to sharecropping or farming communities, sharecropping communities, where the Black people there could not necessarily leave of their own free will. And then based upon that, you had a population that you could study. You could inject with different things. I've seen studies where folks are literally looking at how pesticides work by spraying cotton fields and leaving the Black people who are working the cotton fields in the fields, so that as they develop lung conditions, you now start to talk about how Black people don't have the capacity to breathe in certain places, or they have bad lungs, or these other things as if they're genetic, when the truth of the matter is you're experimenting on them. And so we've been the guinea pigs unwittingly in this country for a long time. But because the stroke and the core of the information is based upon Black people being somehow contaminated anyway, being less human, then we become like the lab rats or the little white mice in the labs, where we're constantly being, we're having things tested on us and we don't necessarily know this. And then the scope of that becomes Black people are 10 times more likely to have this. They're 10 times more likely to do this or to die of these conditions, or their behaviors lend themselves to these particular things.
When you said make better people, it was inferred, but I want to state the obvious. When the Nazis were trying to make the superior race, they were not doing this for the betterment of mankind, even though in their warped racist minds, they thought so. This was not was altruistic by any stretch of the imagination. They were trying to make better white people at the expense of people of color. Is that hyperbolic on my?
No, it's on point. I mean, the fact of the matter is, if you consider non-white people to be subhuman or a subspecies, let's pull this into America. When you say American, you're not talking about Black people, you're talking about white people. That's why you have to add these hyphens: African American, Korean American, Mexican American, because America is the culture. It is also the race. It is also the health. It is also the patriotism. It is also the citizenship. And so this language becomes loaded. So when you say American, I'm looking at things that are talking about the American birth rate. The American birth rate is not going down when we're talking about Black people or Hispanic people. So where in America is the birth issue? It's an American issue. It's a white issue.
It's a very white issue. And I'm quickly trying to put my hands on a piece by Dr. Walters here. I think I have it. That speaks to this in the political context, where he well, I can't find the quote, but he basically talks about it's very important to understand that. Oh, here we go. This is from White Nationalism, Black Interests. And so this is your eugenics on the policy side. If a race is dominant to the extent that it controls the government of the state, defined as the authoritative institutions of decision-making, it is able to utilize those institutions and the policy outcomes they produce as instruments through which it is also structures its racial interests. Given a condition where one race is dominant in all political institutions, most policy appears to take on an objective quality where policymakers argue they are acting on the basis of national interests rather than racial ones, end quote. So that's Dr. Walters telling us, if I can just cut to the chase, when white folks run the show, and they speak in the national interest, they're talking about their interests, not ours. And that's
absolutely
go. Okay. All right.
That's it.
So 2 other points about Tuskegee that I think are very important for people to understand. I know there were black nurses involved.
Mhm.
And weren't there also black physicians involved?
Absolutely.
And there is some question about whether there was actual consent. How much of this did they actually know, or were they dupes? Isn't that a question that gets posed?
It's a question that's posed
Okay.
often because the belief is that if there's a black person in the room, that they're going to side for black people. They're going to defend. They're going to try and help. But the reality is, when we're talking science, we're talking medicine and science on behalf of the nation, on behalf of, Americans, we want to make sure that we have a healthy pool of black people as well. So it benefited and it benefits currently
Mm-hmm.
many black leaders to hold on to these eugenic things and these eugenic tropes and these eugenic theories, where even though we don't talk about sterilizing people in the same way we did then,
Mm-hmm.
all right, you still hear people say, black people even, this person has too many kids. They don't need to have any more kids. They're on welfare already. So what do? You give
Ronald
them,
Reagan's welfare queen.
right. Well, right. If a white person says this, it's racist. If a black person says she already has 10 kids, she doesn't need any more. She can't afford them now. She's neglecting them. We start with this other thing and it becomes, so what do? Give her Norplan or something. And if that doesn't work, go ahead and give her a hysterectomy. That's eugenics. That's
an example of that on the other side is Octomom.
Exactly.
Because she got a TV show, or she was trying to get there were people who were saying, oh, this woman is out here tripping and something needs to be done. But there were also those that wanted to glorify her, put her on television in order to generate revenue.
But also public opinion, where she was a single woman.
Mm-hmm.
She already had one child that she was having trouble supporting. Then it became who should have access to IVF and all these other things. And then who's going to pay for all of these 9 children that she has? And, it was like, what is she going to do with them? And da-da-da-da. But you give the Duggars, one, she's single. If it's the Duggars who are just full of all types of deficiencies over here, I'm using eugenic terms, I'm sorry.
Right.
All of a sudden it was like, right, give them a TV show, give them money, give them this, give them that. Because what you're doing with television is programming people to believe some people need this, some people don't. If this was a black female in Chicago in the Robert Taylor homes years ago, and she had 10 or 11 kids, you'd be running her up a flagpole at this point and talking about the degeneracy and her kids are going to be this, and there's no father in the house and all of these other things. So when you push this politically and you start talking policy, this is what you're concerned about. We should be concerned about on a local, on a national, and even an international scale. And so as you start to talk about candidates, we have to have a clear understanding of where our potential leaders fall, whether they're black or white, because black people are also Americans,
mm-hmm.
right? And so we're living the American dream. And I don't want these people living next to me. And I don't want a prison next to me. And I don't want a halfway house over here. And I don't want this school of kids over here. And I don't want this, and this. And that's an American thing, even if the person or the kids or the people I'm talking about happen to be brown just like me.
So to wrap up the Tuskegee, what are the 2 biggest misnomers about Tuskegee that you want this audience to have a better understanding of? Before we get to Henrietta Lacks, what do you want people to understand about Tuskegee?
That Tuskegee was not the only place, and I don't even like it being named that. It was the Eugenics Records Office's serological studies. And you had 5 other places other than Tuskegee where these serological tests were being done, and they did not necessarily stop.
Oh, meaning that they're still ongoing? But because I know they were going well into the 70s at least.
And if Tuskegee is the only one that they're talking about, what makes you think that the serological studies that were taking place in Mississippi and in Tennessee and in Georgia just
in North Carolina?
In North Carolina. And again, there's a whole record of this, but we don't talk about that. And we don't talk about the Black people intrinsically involved in these studies and in this research.
Henrietta Lacks, if you would elaborate.
One thing that we don't discuss with Henrietta Lacks is that the fact of the matter was that she was at Crownsville. She was in Maryland. Once again, you must make the connection between eugenics and these carceral spaces, either asylums, places where you need to have a mental rest. I don't like even calling them like it's a home for the mentally ill. You know, this person may have been having menopausal symptoms. They have women in there, they were reading too much. There's a Howard University professor, his name escapes me at the moment, high-ranking Howard University professor. He was caught up in Crownsville at some point and died there.
And okay? What, for those that don't know, what is Crownsville?
Crownsville was the Maryland. It's a we would say asylum now, but it was a place for people who were quote unquote feeble-minded or had mental health issues. And you could be put there for any of a number of reasons. But once you were there, this was the one specifically for Black folks. Okay, so a whole Black neighborhood was cleared in order to put this asylum there. And to let you know what they thought of Black people, they made the Black people who were supposed to be the patients actually build the hospital itself. All right. And it remained open for quite a while, but it was a place of torture. All right. It was a place of experiments. And Henrietta Lacks ended up there. And so while she's telling people, okay, I'm having fibroid issues, a potential cancer issue. Once you're in these spaces, you don't have rights over your own body. So the experiments and the biopsies and the whatever else are also taking place in these spaces. And so that's where she was when all of this transpired, grabbing her cells, studying her cells. If you knew the cells could give us the cancer treatments that we have today, were you actually trying to treat her, or were you trying to advance science? And so we have to start looking at who were some of the Black doctors that were there, who were the other universities. You have universities that are attached to these asylums. All right. And so it's not just, even if you're talking Tuskegee, it's not just Tuskegee as the area, it's Tuskegee, the university. It's, it's Howard or it's Meharry, it's Black institutions as well. And you have to look at this. Some of this is a class issue, but it's always a consciousness issue. All right.
And just so people know that Henrietta Lacks, she was the first African-American woman whose cancer cells are the source of the HeLa cell line, which is the first immortalized human cell line and one of the most important cell lines in medical research. And a lot of people made a lot of money,
still are,
hundreds of millions of dollars off of her body. And up until recently, her family did not receive any type of compensation for the illegal use of her body. And I want to put it in the context of body, because when you talk about cells and people go, oh, cells, what the hell? No, it was her body that they used to create an incredibly valuable, some would say invaluable, because you really can't even put a value on it. And up until recently, her family, I can see you want to go ahead.
Well, when you start talking about the value of Black bodies, we can go currently, as of last year, the children that were involved. There was a situation in Philadelphia, 1985. Okay, where it was a group of what they called militant resistant Black folks, the Africa family. All right,
the MOVE movement
community, right? They were in a lovely community, and so they had this MOVE project that they were doing. This is their thing, and you had a Black mayor at this point who said,
William Good.
There you go. Mayor
who
Good
was
said,
bad.
I'm sick of having to deal with this. And instead of charging the house, which had children and its whole family communal type of space, he said, let's drop a bomb. Get a helicopter to drop a bomb on the house, which of course ended up spreading. It tears up the entire neighborhood. But here's the point with this. 2 of the children that died in the bombing, somehow their bodies were sold, given over to the University of Pennsylvania. all right, for study, for research, because the idea is there a difference in the brain and the mentality of a resistant Black family and their children, their progeny, that we need to be aware of? So now you have a university studying the brains and the body parts of dead children. The family does not know. The family did not know until last year.
Oh,
that
wow.
The university didn't even know that the bodies were sitting on the shelf now.
Because some of the other children survived and are now in their 30s and 40s.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So they had to give those, but we're going to give you the bodies back so they can be interred. What were you doing with these children? You were studying them. You're studying them not just as cadavers. They were being used in the classroom. For what purpose, though? And so I think that we need to really grapple with the fact that there's a value to Black bodies, even if there's not a value to Black people. The culture is amazing, and this, and this. But there is a value to Black bodies that we don't talk about. And so there are folks that are you have dollar signs on you when they see you. They have dollar signs on your womb. They have dollar signs on you as you matriculate through life and you navigate different systems. And the goal is to extract as much as possible while we're just kind of not paying attention to any of it.
There's the adage, you are a product of your environment. And so, people will look at me, look at you, and, how did you all, become PhDs? Well, they haven't met your mother.
No,
they haven't met, I've had the blessing. They haven't met your parent. They haven't met my parents. We are products of our environment. So when you look at the children from in the Africa family from Move in Philadelphia, those children, there was nothing biologically different that made them one way or another. They were products. They were raised a certain way. Just as they want to talk about Black on Black crime, ignoring the fact that crime occurs everywhere. You tend to commit crime in the space that's closest to you against those that are closest to you, and that poverty is one of the greatest contributors to a criminal element, not psychosis, not phenotype. And final point, as they talk about Black on Black crime, who did the mafia commit most of its crime against? Other Italians. Who did the Polish mafia? Who did the Russian mob? Who does the Israeli mob commit crime against? Those that are closest to them. But we don't understand it in that context.
Wilmer, I'm going to throw this in here real quick. The University of Pennsylvania has a long history of studying Black folks, especially ones that they consider to be degenerate types. All right. For years, I did a series for Acumen Magazine called The Crack Baby Turns 30. And it looked at a study, a longitudinal study that the University of Pennsylvania was doing, where they actually studied the children, the newborn babies that were left at the hospital by women who were crack addicted at that point. And they had the terrible lines in their notes saying things like, these children don't look you in the face. They are born with a pathology. They will be criminals and they will be murderers, and they don't even cry like real babies. They're like animals, okay? 30 years on, and they're studying these kids every month. 30 years later, they come back and say, each one of those children, provided they were given to a aunt, a grandparent, or someone else, and they were loved on and taken care of, they turned out just fine. None of them have been in prison. None of them have committed crimes. None of them have had out wedlock babies. Most of them, I think they said 90% of them have been to college. All right. So it automatically tells you that the nature versus nurture is really just a dream. It's a dream sequence in some madman's laboratory where you're going to try and make a case by creating an environment where you're defunding this and unhousing people and then saying this is a self-fulfilling prophecy, or this is all about the numbers and these are the stats and this is where this goes. And it is simply not true.
Some may have heard me tell this story before, but nature versus nurture, really quick example. I went to a private Catholic high school in Sacramento, Christian Brothers High School, and had to pay tuition to get there, right? So whether it was hook or by crook, I can obviously afford to be there because I'm there. So the guidance counselor at the time, Mr. Patrick O'Brien, sees me wearing a Hampton sweatshirt. And I'm walking down the hall and he says, "Wilmer, what is that?" And I said, "Oh, this is the sweatshirt from the college I'm going to go to." And he says, "You're going to college?" I said, "Yeah, Mr. O'Brien, I'm going to college." He said, "Wilmer, have you ever thought about trade school?" I said, "No, I have never thought about trade school." He says, "Well, why not?" I said, "Because honestly, Mr. O'Brien, I don't want to have to take the ass whooping that I'm going to take if I go home and tell my parents I'm not going to college." Now, there's nothing against going to trade school, but in my house,
Exactly.
that was not an option.
Not one.
So it was all a matter of environment. And so people look at my son now, who just graduated from Hampton, and you know, the boy understands he has two options: conform or perish. That's the way. So it's not a miracle. It's an environment. It's a level of expectation that is set. It's a matter of standards that must be maintained, and understanding if you follow the path, life is great. If you deviate from the path, you might have a problem on your hands, and you have to make a decision. Do I want this problem, or do I? That's all. Am I wrong?
No, I mean, it's spot on. And I think that, again, we understood this 50 years ago in a way that we're not passing that information down now. So the fact that someone can come to me now with eugenic thoughts and tell me, if a Black child hasn't learned to read by the time they're in the 3rd grade, they have automatically lined themselves up to go to prison. Who came up with that foolishness?
Wait a minute. Wait a minute. I'm one of those kids. I'm one of those kids.
Come on now.
I was reading well below grade level when I was in the 3rd grade.
All right.
And they had and that was the time when they had shifted how they were teaching reading away from phonics to sight words. Fortunately for me, my parents, we had a very dear friend, Mrs. Gloria Bodie, who was a reading specialist. She would come to the house 3 times a week after dinner. She taught me phonics. And within, godly, it wasn't even a month, I went from reading below the 3rd grade level in 3rd grade to reading at the 7th grade level. All she did was teach me phonics.
Exactly. So the fact that you can add fake science over here with the eugenic themes, add it to policy, trickle it into the school system, add some funding issues with this. It's like, I need you to understand that's what public libraries are for. I need you to understand that every child learns at a different rate. I need you to understand that if there's calamity all around this child outside in the neighborhood, they're not listening for concentration purposes, and it may be hindering them. There are things that we knew, and we knew how to meet those challenges to ensure that the children in this great space would be able to matriculate. We haven't gone bonkers, so why is it that we're feeding into this and actually accepting that it's true, and then getting on television and saying, yes, as a Black psychologist, it is true that if Black kids don't start reading, you have Black people who don't know how to read until they are adults, but they've never committed crimes and they didn't turn into quote unquote degenerates. So why are we leaning into this, 10 toes down, like it really is a fact?
I know some of those people who became very productive individuals, and education became very, very important for them because they understood the value of what they didn't have, and they instilled in their children, who went on to college and went on to get master's degrees and other advanced degrees. And many of those kids didn't even realize until after they got out of school that their parents couldn't even read.
Many people went to their graves as Black people and white people who never learned to read, period. But
Right.
that was not a part of their character. Like, if you can't read, you're automatically going to become a criminal. That's not the way this works. It's not the way it works. So the fact that we bought into this again tells me that we're moving back into these eugenic themes without, it's the popular social eugenics that the average everyday person is just like, yeah, that makes sense. It does not.
It only makes sense if you don't have any sense. So moving into these popular eugenics themes, getting to now the question that I open the show with. How does the false construct of race, and yes, race is a false construct, or the real constructs of culture and cultural identity factor into our opposition to or support for a political candidate? And that all centers around, and I'll state the obvious here, right now the presumed Democratic nominee, Kamala Harris, whose father is Jamaican, whose mother is Indian, and she in some circles is considered to be an African American woman. I've heard her referred to as such. I've also heard her in many current commercials referred to as an Indian American woman. And I want to stress, this is not a judgmental conversation.
No.
Let me throw it to you, Dr. Sherman.
The issue at hand, Wilmer, is that however many of those boxes she chooses to check that show diversity,
or are checked for her,
either way, all of those lend themselves to the greater eugenic conversation, which is she is non-white. Okay, 1924, racial integrity. That act coming out of Virginia said there are only two races. Skip the Mongoloid, Caucasoid. We're going to scratch all of that. There are only two races, white and non-white. And the fact that she's also female. That's another thing that we have to deal with. And so it's public perception, American public perception, sometimes global public perception of what it means to be any of these things, or an amalgamation of all of these things. And some people may be offended by the term amalgamation, a mixture, right? We're all a mixture of a bunch of other things. What does that mean? And so each one of these people who are definitive about whiteness and Americanism and patriotism, they're questioning, as they did with Obama, citizenship. They're questioning her womanhood at this point. They're questioning,
as they did with Michelle Obama.
Exactly. They're questioning, but with on this side, how many kids does Kamala have? And then the fact that, you know,
didn't J.D. Vance call her a cat woman because she doesn't have any biological children of her own?
What is that exactly?
Right.
Exactly. So,
but wait a minute. I gotta mention, when I mention his name, we always must say, for those who don't know, J.D. Vance is now Donald Trump's vice presidential nominee. He's the same guy who about 3 years ago compared Donald Trump to Adolf Hitler. So one has to ask the question, how does a guy who 3 years ago called another guy Adolf Hitler wind up standing next to that guy as his vice presidential nominee? He didn't even call him Mussolini. He called him Hitler.
And pay attention to the fact that when Kamala was named as Joe Biden's running mate, once again, I heard the senator say, okay, now we're going to have Aunt Jemima in the White House. All right. This woman doesn't look like Aunt Jemima. No connections whatsoever. But all of a sudden, this is what folks are thinking of you in these spaces all along. And so the nastiness of it starts to come out. The thing
Wait a minute. And that takes me to Tiger Woods when he first won the Masters tournament, and the year after the Masters tournament, the winner gets to determine the menu for the players' dinner, and Fuzzy Zeller says, "Oh, we're gonna have fried chicken tonight."
Fried chicken and watermelon.
There you go.
Yeah. So
Okay.
again, it is my question is, if we are that removed from the plantation at this point, why are you constantly trying to throw people back onto it? Or these are the only references that you're coming up with when you can clearly see in front of you that this isn't the case. It's the Ferris State University, their whole thing, their memorabilia collection that they have of racist items that came up 1870 and moving forward. And it was like, while we're saying they're racist, these are the things that keep peace in many white minds. I need an Aunt Jemima salt and pepper shaker.
Mm-hmm.
I need an Aunt Jemima cookie jar. I need to put her face on the pancake box. I need to have two little black kids as the icons, or the folks that I'm using for gold dust, soap powder, and for this and for that and for the other. And so in researching how labels and emblems and mascots were created, you start to find that when white people feel uncomfortable in this country, they tend to hold on to the things that they did love about Black people. And so that hasn't changed. We're going to show Kamala dancing, and we're going to show her doing all of these things, loving cats, the things that make white people feel good and feel comfortable and feel wholesome and feel whole. She is a part of our group. And at the same time, you have Black people who are going, but she's married to someone who's not Black.
Mm-hmm. Well, now, I was asked that question. I won't mention the woman's name, who said to me, "Wilmer, why do Black men hate Kamala Harris?" And I said, "I don't know that Black men do hate Kamala Harris. I haven't seen any data." I said, "But let me pose this to you. Why does she hate Black men?" And it was, "What?" I said, "Well, she didn't marry a brother." And I said, "I'm not equating the fact that she didn't marry a brother to say that she hates Black men. I am just posing that as a ridiculous premise to your ridiculous premise, and riddle me that." And I couldn't get an answer.
No, we're still stuck in an antebellum mindset. Many folks are just still stuck there. And so, it doesn't make sense that I can walk into a room and someone is waiting for me to flip some pancakes. Or am I the cleaning lady?
Mm-hmm.
Am I here for any type of servant position? Nothing wrong with servants. All right. But when you visually look at a person and you start to quote unquote assess them, not my character, not any of these other things, but you're seeing me for the first time. If your reaction is to put me into this particular position, you need to ask yourself why. This is something that, as the commander-in-chief, potential commander-in-chief of this country, that she is going to have to face down in the same way that President Obama had to, but she's also going to have this added level of, this is a female who does not have children, and all of these she's suspicious to folks. She's suspicious to the nation. And it's simply unfair, and it's unfounded, but it's how we do things here a lot of times.
So let's take the other side of this, because when she first announced that she wanted to be president in this, after Joe Biden stepped down, the narrative was she's earned it. She deserves it. I think it was Simone Sanders Townsend who was saying, and some of her other surrogates who were saying, what problem does the Democratic Party have with wanting a Black woman at the top of the ticket? It was all about her being an AKA. She went to Howard, and she can do the electric slide. We were falling into that same mindset in terms of rallying the troops around her, instead of asking the questions: where does she stand on Gaza? What's she going to do about Ukraine? What's her policy on Cop City? Where is she on the George Floyd Act and all and policy issues? And when we started listing policy issues and wanting her to articulate where she stands on policy, then the question becomes, why are you hating on the sister? Why do you hate black women? No, I don't hate black women. I know that AKA's Howard University, and I have 2 degrees from Howard, so I ain't hating on Howard, and being able to do electric slide, that ain't gonna feed the bulldog.
Well, and the truth of the matter, I don't believe our percentage is 13% still, because it's just not fathomable.
Right.
We've been producing. So I'm going to say the black population in this country, let's say it's at about 18% right now.
Okay.
All right. You still have the whole rest of the country. All right. That to some extent, mentally and emotionally, you're going to have to reunite in the same way Obama had to reunite them, because they had blown apart with even the thought of having a black man in office. Okay. Mm-hmm. You're going to have to suture us back together.
Donald Trump was the reaction to Barack Obama.
Absolutely. And the belief that even at this point, I still have people saying Barack Obama is running the White House behind Biden all this time. And I'm going, are you serious? So it doesn't matter the truth. The truth doesn't matter at this point. It's what you feel. And I'm telling people, it's not about what you feel. Your feelings don't enter into the facts at this point. I need you to start talking about the fact that the housing in this country is so deliberately greedy and ridiculous that working people are living in homeless shelters. All right. I need you to talk about
college professors in California are living in their cars.
I need you. And this is across the country and quite frankly, it's across the globe. So I need you to talk to me about investing and divesting in certain things. I need to know where Kamala stands on certain things. I haven't really heard. I don't know what her platform is on certain things. I would love to have someone talk to her rather than having Megan Thee Stallion up dancing with her. I don't care about that. I don't want to hear about that. Right now, you're telling me people are blowing me up about Project 2025, which, by the way, is nothing but the NATO group and some other folks from 1925 still trying to push conservative policy. This isn't new. It's not new.
It's called Newt Gingrich's contract with America.
Thank you. Nothing on that list is new. Nothing on it is new. So it's like, even if it were true, and I understand that a lot of it is not true, it wasn't in the 880-page document that most people haven't read. All right. When I started sifting through it, it was like, that didn't happen. That's not in the document. That's not there. These are proposals. And do you know how many think tanks put out proposals every time there's about to be a change of leadership? So it's like, don't get up in arms. This is something that we always face. But in the meantime, can you tell me where, if this were something that was about to take place, where your local leaders positioned on this? Because we got Biden in office right now, but you still can't afford to get a bag of potato chips for less than $4 or $5 right now. What is going on with the cost of living and the American dream? Why are you having corporations buying up housing so that the average person can't afford them?
BlackRock.
Help me out. So
people don't understand that as a result of the COVID crisis and the mortgage crisis and all of these homes that people were put out of, BlackRock and other venture capitalist companies were buying up the housing stock, and they weren't putting the housing stock back on the market for sale. They were putting the housing stock back on the market for rent.
Absolutely. For rent. And if you're charging, there's nothing, I'm going to say it on the record, there's nothing inside Washington, D.C. that's worth $5,000 a month as a 2-bedroom apartment. Nothing. Nowhere in this city is it worth it. But those are the going rates. And so when you look at this, go ahead.
And as Vice President Harris is on the stump saying, Donald Trump is a convicted felon, and as a former prosecutor, I know how to deal with felons. I know that personality. Well, when you had Steve Mnuchin in your sights, when he was the bankster in California, and your staff brought you 1,000 felonies committed by the man, you didn't pursue the case against Steve Mnuchin, who wound up being our Secretary of Treasury under Donald Trump. So when don't hate, Malcolm said, when my telling you the truth makes you angry, don't get angry at me. Get angry at the truth. I don't do the electric slide. I'm not an AKA. I am in the Divine Nine, but I don't do the. And so those things don't matter to me. Dr. Sherman.
It's going to have to matter to us what the policies and standpoints are that Kamala Harris brings to the table. I just want to know her positions on things. I have, the lesser of two evils, true, as it appears. And I believe she would make a wonderful president, but I would love to know where she stands on all of these issues that are also international issues. That are also, I've been trying to get someone from the state of California, a representative, and I don't have to call the person's name, all right, to talk to me about the sterilizations that are being forced on Black and Spanish women inside California penitentiaries for the last 8 years. And I can't get a call back. So I want you to understand that it's not about Blackness. It's about, I need you to make sure that my American dream isn't a nightmare that you get to blame on Donald Trump or anybody else. We have Black elected officials. We're not holding anyone accountable, and we're not holding them accountable from the moment we elect them. You're not asking the proper questions. And so
you won't get the right answer.
I want Kamala Harris to win. I'll put on the t-shirt, all of that. But in the meantime, I want to know where she stands on some things that impact my quality of life and the quality of life for the folks who are around me. I've crossed 50 years old at this point. So I'm trying to figure out if I had to go lay down and retire somewhere, is there a patch of dirt in the woods for me that you want to then come through and arrest me for being homeless on and lock me up for it? That's a reality. They're locking up homeless people. It's their laws in certain states now. And these states have Black representatives. No one's talking about this. We're talking about the suits that people are wearing and their connections and affiliations with other things that don't benefit us at the moment.
And right? Rappers.
And just where's your while you dancing, when it comes time to pick your kid up from the daycare center, are you gonna find out that they've raised the rate so that you got to pay $3,500 a month for the kid to go to the daycare?
And two things. One is we keep hearing that we can't afford to provide quality daycare to people across the country, but we can send $1 trillion to Ukraine. See, budgets are numeric representations of priority.
And also add to that, even if we didn't have the money, we had the consciousness, we had the heart to say that the grandmother in the neighborhood who was opening her home should still be able to do that without being licensed to a point where she has to pay $2,500 to the city and go to a class for 8. She raised 10 kids and 15 grandkids. She knows what she's doing. You've kept us from being able to have that communal space. Now, that's not just, I want some money. That's being vindictive. You're setting up the parameters, the variables that are going to lend to the things that you're talking about as Black people and poor people. You're creating poverty. That's what you're doing right now.
Norway can do it. Finland can do it. Denmark can do it. They're doing it.
Anyone who is for their citizens can and will do it. The difference here is that we're not working together. We've always been fighting against each other. It's the infighting. I want my kids to be able to have it, but not your kids. I don't want immigrant kids. I don't want my kids around the Spanish kids because they're going to learn Spanish and there's too many of them and they're undocumented and they can have diseases and I don't know what they're into. Well, the same thing was said about Black people coming into quote unquote white spaces. So if we're going to do America, we got to do America for everyone. And we got to make sure that these policies don't hurt this person in order to make me feel better. And in the long run, end up hurting me as well.
And my current piece is you're with her, but is she with you? And the premise of the piece is, and I say this in the piece, it's not about her. It's about us. And what are we going to demand of her relative to us? Because that's what politics is all about. It's about policy output. It's not about the Divine Nine and Howard University and the electric slide. It's about policy output. She went to the CARICOM meeting as vice president and tried to convince the leaders of those Caribbean nations to be the minstrel face on American imperialism to invade Haiti. How does a Black woman whose father is from Jamaica believe that our invading Haiti is a good idea? She didn't go alone. She went with Hakeem Jeffries and some other folks, Linda Thomas Greenfield. How do these Black people buy into imperialist neo-colonial policies like that? And so I make that to take us back to the eugenics question and the identity question, and I'll throw that to you.
Because it's all about the fitness of the individual person or the group. And so Haiti has always been the bastard Black child that even Black folks don't want to claim. A small minority of Black folks always down for Haiti, always they're with you. But there are all these people who are still, you want to glamorize Africa, but you won't set foot there. You want to go to Africa, but you don't want to stay there. All right. You don't understand the politics, the culture, the language, the faith, none of it. But since it's been tagged onto you as African American, you claim it. And so, but when you get down to it, we still have eugenic thoughts as Black people about who is fit and unfit, who is worthy, who is unworthy. And it's about nothing related to character. It is about nothing related to morality or how people handle you or them being good people. Or da, da, da. It's all about the same things that white people use, the litmus test, to define you. And so we cannot get away from that as easily as we think. And things like this, when we get into a space like this, it magnifies it. And we start to see ourselves. And it does not look good. It doesn't look good on us at all. Haiti, poor Black people, folks living in the projects, historically Black colleges and universities, not the elite 8, the big 8, but the rest of them, the ones that we don't really want to talk about, that's in them other states that we don't want to deal with. All right. We don't want to deal with that. There are things that we need to discuss to make sure that HBCUs and the Divine Nine still exist. If the federal government starts pulling money back, we've had the heirs desegregation case, we've had a similar case in Maryland, where basically HBCUs are being said to be anti-white at this point.
Right.
And in order to get the money that these HBCUs won for having been discriminated against with funding, it's being said in order to get the money, you now have to have 5 to 10% of your student population be minority. Well, that minority has to be white. So now you're giving free education to white students in order to get the money that's owed to you from having been discriminated against in the first place. You have to understand in street terms, we've been in a trick bag for a minute. Right?
Right.
And we need to stop playing games. It's late in the day. You need to hew your line. All right. I'm going back to Zora Neale Hurston. Hew your line. You need to understand that you're about to get caught up in the very trap that you've been setting and you're not paying attention. You're simply not paying attention. We haven't been paying our alumni fees like we're supposed to. Our schools are still dependent on federal government funding and state funding. We are not standing alone. So we need to make sure that our leadership also understands that we need to have practical solutions and policies so that we're not reacting to things, but literally charting a course and setting it and staying on that course.
What are you demanding? And two things to your point about funding in HBCUs. The HBCUs in Maryland won a case against the Maryland government for not properly funding those HBCUs as the state had funded the predominantly white institutions. Went all the way to the Maryland Supreme Court.
Yep.
And the schools won. The Republican governor, Larry Hogan, refused to give them the money that the court awarded and forced those institutions to negotiate a lower number. I don't remember what the numbers were off the top of my head, but
yes, sir.
What?
Again, The exact same thing happened in Mississippi. That's what I said. That was the heirs desegregation case. And it was the exact same thing. The money that came down to fund the Mississippi schools, they gave the HBCUs less money when they disseminated. And they was like, okay, Mississippi won the HBCUs won the case. But the contention, the little fine print said, we're going to give you the money, but now you are required at this point to add 10% of your population needs to be minority. On a Black campus, that's not Black students. And they said, we can pull in some Africans and some people that still fit. No, you need to have some white students on this campus now. So that was the quote unquote, that's how they got around it. And it was like, wow, these are the nasty tricks that I'm talking about. And so if it happened in Mississippi and it's happened in Maryland, where else is this happening? Can I get leadership to understand this is how you tie Black hands behind the backs of citizens that actually want to go to school? All right.
Final thing, symbolism. And again, I'm getting back to ethnicity and cultural identity as it relates to Vice President Harris. And I'm not picking on her. She just is the poster child of this in the moment. Because there's an awful lot of symbolism that is being used here. And again, they rather be symbolic than talk about substantive policy output.
The symbolism goes to the heart of the nation. Whose nation is it? Whose America is it? That's which one of the presidents?
Well, you mean we want our country? We want our
no, Coolidge, Calvin Coolidge.
Okay.
You know, whose country is it anyway? And so you literally, you're having white Americans say this is ours and we've allowed you to be here.
We Tom Tancredo and we want and the Tea Party, which was the precursor to Donald Trump, we want our country back.
So again, but how have you lost it?
Who has it? Because I don't have it. Tom Tancredo, if you're listening, if you're watching, I don't have your country.
So, and again, so that's how you start again. When you're going to see an explosion of language about women having babies and birth control and all this. And again, it's this, they're having natal conferences, once or twice a year where people are talking about, we need to get the country back. And getting the country back means we need white women to have babies and they're not having them. All right. And so based on that alone, any white female who's out here supporting Donald Trump and all of these policies, they don't necessarily understand what you're about to do is send yourself back into the house. All right. Because there's a good white man that needs the job that you're sitting in. All right. You need to be producing babies. Bottom line. And if you're not, you serve no purpose now to the nation. That is a Hitler-esque thing, but Hitler got it from us. All right. So that is a Francis Galton thing.
Well, in fact, thank you very much, because you and I had talked about that. Francis Galton, father of modern eugenics. There's a book, Control: The Dark History and Troubling Present of Eugenics. It's by Adam Rutherford. Talk about Francis Galton and talk about Adam Rutherford's book.
Just the idea. First, Rutherford's book is an amazing examination. I think that it's something that pulls together a lot of the research from different spaces and different years, and to synthesize it the way he has, it makes sense to the average person, which is critical at this point. It's not talking above folks' heads. So you get to the critical analysis of, we need these birthing numbers. Statisticians started coming in, and Galton is right here in the middle of this. And you have the Eugenics Record Office who are literally charting birth rates, and they're trying to figure out, with immigration, emancipated Black people, and then you end up with Chinese people and all these other folks that are coming in, and then you start having women who decide they're not going to stay at home. These birth rates matter, and they have mattered for the last 150 years, because whoever has the birth numbers, when we start talking politics, these are voting blocks. Okay. And if I can put you under duress if I can incarcerate you and then tell you based on the fact that you're in prison, you're no longer quote unquote a citizen, so you're not able to vote because you have a felony charge. That is a reality for those Black men who are huddled in prisons. But the other part of that reality is that because during the reproductive height of their lives, they're in prison, it means that they're not reproducing children. And so there's a duality to having Black men and Spanish men and locked into these prisons and degenerate, quote unquote, white men. We don't want babies from them anyway.
And the fastest growing cohort in prisons are women.
And when the women go into the prisons, they are automatically taken before what used to be the sterilization board. They're given a physical examination. If you're a Black woman, a Spanish woman, and you have fibroids, they're going to tell you, we're not going to manage your fibroids while you're here. We're just going to recommend that you have a hysterectomy. Or they may not even tell you. So great documentary, Belly of the Beast, looks at the California state penitentiary system, and they're just ad hoc deciding to sterilize Black and Spanish women without their consent and without their knowledge. Because they said, once we open you up, it's easier just to go ahead and snip you than to worry about having to pay for your children either ending up in prison, being slow and retarded mentally, having to go to special schools, or having to pay through the welfare system because they're not normal, because you're not normal. You're breeding criminals. And so we have to look at these things. I think Rutherford did a great job, but Galton has been talking about, he started talking about this when he coined the phrase. We were already talking about this, and the Black bodies on plantations started this whole, let's check the women's bodies and see what they can manage and hold as far as their fecundity, as far as their being able to breed the next crop of Americans.
So are those eugenic practices relative to women of color in California prisons still going on as you and I are speaking right now?
Absolutely.
So our Vice President, Kamala Harris, who is the presumptive Democratic Party nominee, is from Berkeley, was the DA in San Francisco, was the Attorney General in the state of California, was the senator from California. I haven't heard anybody ask her this question.
I have not heard anyone ask
anybody,
any elected official. You've only had the Congressman Wormel from North Carolina, who got reparations for folks who have been sterilized, many of them Black in North Carolina. He's since passed away. Virginia asked that people come forward if they had been sterilized, but people couldn't come forward because they didn't know they'd been sterilized. You took them in and told them that they had an appendicitis. So they didn't know that the reason why they didn't produce children is because when they went into the hospital, you decided to do a hook and crook on them. They didn't know. So based on just that information, you have very few people in the state of Virginia to come forward and to receive the money. California is now offering some reparations to folks, but if you're in those penal systems, it's still going on. You don't have control over your body.
And I want to be very clear to say, I'm not for those that just heard me ask that question. And Wilmer, why are you blaming her for this? I'm not. I'm saying I haven't heard anyone ask her this question. And again, because it's not about her, it's about us. And what are we as a political constituency, what are we going to do? What are we going to demand? What are we going to get if we are responsible for putting her in office, which everybody says Democrats can't win without Black people?
Okay.
All right.
Again, I think that she would make an amazing president. Okay. Again, I simply want to know what her policies are. I want to know how she's going to fight against and how she's sizing up, her time in office. And that's what I want to hear from her. That's it.
Dr. Chantella Sherman, I am so appreciative of you joining me today. As always, dear, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you. Anytime.
Folks, thank you all so much for listening and watching the Connecting the Dots podcast with me, Dr. Wilmer Leon, and my brilliant, brilliant friend and guest, Dr. Chantella Sherman. Stay tuned for new episodes each week. Also, please follow and subscribe, leave a review, share the show. Would greatly, greatly appreciate it. Follow me on social media. You can find all the links below to the show there. And remember, folks, that this is where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge. Talk without analysis is just chatter. And you can tell by this, we don't chatter on Connecting the Dots. See you all again next time. Until then, I am Dr. Wilmer Leon. Have a great one. Peace. I'm out.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.